Folks, if you've never heard of the 8-bar blues, actually I'm going to stop you right there. You definitely have. You just didn't realize that it was an 8-bar blues. Now, most of the best songs in the jazz and blues world, they're actually 8-bar blues and not 12. And maybe the best of those 8-bar blues, and probably the most misunderstood, is actually a minor blues. Now, if you're into the blues at all, you probably already guessed the tune. Of course, this is the Saint James Infirmary, but today we're going to be talking about one of the most overlooked versions, and probably the best to lay the foundation of all the other Saint James Infirmaries to come, by a guy named Snooks Eaglin. If you've never heard of him, kind of bums me out because a lot of you haven't. But today we're going to be demystifying the 8-bar blues and shining a light on one of the best to ever do it. This is Snooks Eaglin's Saint James Infirmary. My name is Kyle Orla, and if you loved our last series, The Alphabetical Blues, well, by God, you are probably going to at least like this series. Welcome to the new one. This is Numerical Blues, where we go into the most contextually important structures of the American folk guitar, or at this point, probably just American music. We're kicking things off with the 8-bar blues, and we're going up in numerical order from here. Again, we're starting with Saint James Infirmary, and if you've never heard Snooks Eaglin, be sure to check him out after this. He was a New Orleans street singer. He had like a huge array of styles. I guess he knew like thousands of songs. He was nicknamed the Human Jukebox at some point in his life. He was also nicknamed Little Ray Charles, and he is definitely the Ray Charles of guitar. So do check him out. I'm excited to dig into his version of Saint James Infirmary with you. But before we get into all that, we got to set this up. What even is an 8-bar blues to begin with, and why is that important? So David Hamburger of the Fretboard Confidential, he's probably done more than anybody to shine a light on the fingerstyle guitar and all its oddities, and definitely more than anybody to start talking about the 8-bar blues. So you should check out his channel if you haven't. He goes in deep on the 8-bar blues in many of the songs and repertoire. Again, a lot of your favorite songs are in fact 8-bar blues. You got, Crow Jane, Troubled in Mind, You Got to Move. There's so many. So tell me your favorite 8-bar blues in the comments. Of course, we'll talk more about the 12-bar blues as the series gets along and how it evolves and turns into in many versions of itself. But today we're going to start with the 8-bar blues, and one of the most easily spotted differences of the 8-bar versus the 12-bar, not just that it's less bars, but it's not stuck in that same chord progression. It's not confined to the kind of 3 stanzas, and the first stanza is essentially just the 1 chord. The second stanza, you splice in 2 measures of a 4 chord and then go back to the 1 chord. And that last stanza, instead of the 4 chord, is the 5 chord, back to the 1 chord. And that's its simplest form. The 8-bar blues, it's not that it's just like a truncated version of that. The chord progressions are much more varied. It's like they're just songs, really. And so the cool thing about Saint James Infirmary is that it is essentially a 1-4-5, like a lot of the 8-bar blues still are, but it's the minor version. Also, if you want to grow your 8-bar blue repertoire, or at least awareness, be sure to join up on my Patreon. I'll be sending you a new song every week by one of the guitar greats for the rest of the month to really build that 8-bar blue awareness. Now, the chord progression for Saint James Infirmary, yes, it is a 1-4-5 in a minor key, but there's so many versions and so many keys because it is such an old tune. It's actually way older than most of us might think. It was originally a ballad, like 18th century ballad, and it's hard to put your finger on which ballad it really came from. It probably came from many, but 2 that are cited is The Unfortunate Rake, or maybe more accurately, The Unfortunate Lad. These things ruffle some feathers out there. But the first time it was actually recorded as an American tune would have been by this group called the Carolina Ramblers, and it was under the name the Charleston Cabin. Now that sounds like a totally different name, but it's the first time the melody was really apparent. It's in a minor key. They actually modulated to a major key later, but that minor part, it's very much Saint James Infirmary with similar lyrics, but has a different title. Of course, as the tune evolved, it took on different names. There's the Gambler Blues. Jimmy Rogers did that, of course, and Dave Van Ronk. There's, of course, the Dying Cowboy. Maybe you didn't know that one, but it got a lot of similar lyrical content, and it's kind of back in that ballad tradition, but the cowboy ballad, the cowboy singing tradition. It was also the name Old Joe's Barroom by Doc Boggs, and Doc Watson put out a version called St. James Hospital. Now, there's a huge compilation out there of all the different St. James's versions. that you can check out. I mean, there's so many versions, but probably the most popular one to put St. James Infirmary on the map was, of course, Louis Armstrong in 1928. And again, because there are so many variations of the tune, like, what's the real chord progression, right? And that's exactly why I love Snooks' version so much. He really distills it down to the very basic, the fundamentals of St. James Infirmary that any other version can really diverge from, or it's very clear how it's diverging or adding to. So most of us play St. James in A minor. Of course, it's taken on many keys, but we'll start there. So you got A minor, moving to E or E7, back to A minor, and E7. And you've got A minor for 2, back to E7. And then the next stanza, we've got A minor to E7. And then you hold A minor because we're going to move to F and E. And it's that F to E, to me, that's just the St. James thing, right? So everything else is pretty simple. I think if you went too simple and you left that F-E out of the equation, you lost the heart of the tune. We've talked a little bit about, like, you know, pattern anatomy and what's important to listen for when you're learning songs. To me, that's a key thing to keep in mind, is that F moving down to E. And again, of course, it floats around all kinds of different keys. Louis Armstrong did it in F minor. Snooks' version was actually in D minor. To me, the most common keys these days are either A minor or D minor. They're kind of interchangeable. Now, Snooks' version is exactly the same, but just shifted to D minor. So here it is in A minor, and then you just transpose it over to D minor. That's it. That's how you do that. Of course, there are a bunch of cool variations, and I'll be putting together a chart for folks over on Patreon. But before we even worry about all that, let's check out Snooks' chords and how he played St. James Infirmary. All right, so again, it's in D minor, and the chords are very basic. There's only 3 of them. So you start with D minor, just home position D minor, to A7. I play it like that. You can play it like this. If you're lazy like me, play it like this. Then back to D minor and A7. The second line, you hold D for 2, and you hold A for 2. Back to D minor, A7. Now hold D for 2. It's a little different, because we're going to move to B flat 7. It's a bar chord. Then A7 and D. Now, D minor. Now, I played a different A7 just because it was the easiest switch. If you wanted to go back to your other one, it sounds the same. The only difference is an open string. But, you know, I'm lazy. You know? What's the laziest way I can get there? So that's the basic chord progression. I'll just play this once through for you. Remember, not all blues are 12-bar blues. In fact, not all blues are evenly barred either. And that's the whole point of this next video in the series. When it's ready, available right here, this is odd bar blues. Kind of the oddball of the blues. Odd bar. All right, we'll see you there. And in the meantime, join up on the Patreon. And yeah, so long, folks.